Hi guys, it's Miss Griffin. We're looking at Unit 7, Skill 4, completing the square for circles. So we've been talking about circles the last couple of skills. We're going to stick with them for another skill right here. This is very different than what you've been doing, so please make sure you pay attention very closely. You've seen this center radius standard form of a circle before, but you haven't seen this thing called general form of a circle. So this is like if we took the center radius form and expanded it out, meaning wrote x minus h twice, distributed, and did all this crazy work, combined like terms, we would end up with an equation that looks like this, where c, d, and e just represent numbers. So we need to change from general form into standard form, and we're going to do that by a process called completing the square. We're not going to be like writing equations of squares. We're just going to be using this process where we complete the square of a trinomial. Trinomial just means three-termed polynomial, which means a bunch of terms. So it says state the center and radius of the following circle. So in the end, I need to have the center and I need to have the radius. So I'm going to write that out, box it in, and remember that I need to write those afterwards. So now we're going to actually follow this process. And if you get lost at all, the steps are just listed on the left-hand side right there. It says move the constant e to the right side of the group, or to the right side. Group x terms together and group y terms together. So here's an x term, y term, and then here's this weirdo constant that needs to be moved to the other side. So I'm going to group the x's. We have x squared minus 12x. And I'm also going to prepare to insert the needed values by putting these plus boxes in here. Or plus blank if you don't prefer to write the box. Then we have plus y squared plus 26y plus box equals, I'm bringing that constant to the other side so it switches signs, negative 189. Then I had a plus green box and a plus blue box. One for x's, one for y's. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other because you got to keep it balanced, right? You can't be so nice to one side, give it extra numbers, and then not be nice to the other side. That would be like the rudest. So to find each missing value, meaning those boxes, take half of that middle term and square it. The value will always be positive. So what I'm doing is, again, taking this value, negative 12, cutting it in half, and then squaring it to put it in the box. So negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. Negative 6 squared is positive 36. It's always positive. And again, whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Then I've got this 26 that's positive. I need to cut it in half and square it. This is always the process. This is called completing the square. 26 cut in half is 13. 13 squared is 169. Now I'm doing this in my head, but you could certainly use a calculator if you're struggling. Just type it in exactly the way that you see it. Right? Parentheses, 26 over 2, parentheses squared. Enter. 169. So now I have to focus on the x terms for a second. Oops, I didn't mean to strike it out. I thought I had a highlighter. So here's my x terms, and I need to think about factoring them. This is going to take you back to algebra with that whole add multiply thing, where you come up with two pairs of parentheses, x times x will give you that x squared, and then I have to find numbers that will multiply to 36 and add to negative 12. So I'll give you a second to think about that. Multiply to 36, add to negative 12. I hope your brain's saying, ding, 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 I got a winner, 6 and 6. Right, 6 times 6 makes 36, and 6 and 6 can add to 12. Now to make it a negative 12, we have to have both the signs be negative. Oops. But really, I just wrote out x minus 6 twice, so really that's x minus 6 quantity squared. Okay, so let's talk about y's for a second. We're going to focus on y's here, where we have to add to 26, multiply to 169. So I still have this plus sign, and then parentheses, parentheses. This time we have y and y to make that y squared. I have to add to 26 and multiply to 169. So again, I'll give you a minute. If you need more time, just pause the video. So I found 13 and 13. 13 times 13 is 169, and 13 plus 13 can make 26. Both are positive this time because I needed a positive 26. So really, I'm just writing y plus 13 twice, meaning it's squared, because it's multiplied by itself. And then we have equals whatever this gives me over here. So I just type it straight into my calculator. So I'm going to carry that number all the way down, and I get 16. We just wrote the equation of a circle. X minus h, parentheses squared, y minus k, parentheses squared, equals r squared. Right? So now I can list the center and the radius of this circle by changing the signs. So negative 6 becomes positive 6. Positive 13 becomes negative 13. And then to find the radius, remember how we were like taking a number and squaring it back in skills 7.2 and 3? Well, this time we have to undo that squaring, because essentially r squared equals 16 right now. That's what we're saying. So to undo it, we have to take the square root. This one just happens to be a nice number, which in this case is 4. If it weren't a nice number, I would just leave it the way that it is. Now, I do want to point out something to you that you might have noticed already. In order to come up with these values that became squared, all I have to do is take this term that we had cut in half and squared before, just cut it in half to get the number that goes inside the parentheses. Negative 12 divided by 2 gives me negative 6, and then here's my little squared. 26 divided by 2 gives me 13. And notice that I keep the sign. This was a positive, I kept a positive. This was a negative, I kept a negative. And then again, my squared's right here, so I don't have to worry about squaring it when I put it in the parentheses. We're going to do 2 more examples of this same process, because it's a lengthy process, but it's not a hard one. You just got to get in the habit of repeating it. So again, x's with x's, y's with y's. I'm going to do x's in green again. Ooh, but wait a second. This one's got to move over because it's on the other side of the equal sign. Only the constant can be on the right side. Y with y, and then constant by itself. Okay, so we've got x squared. When I move this 32x over, it's going to become positive 32x. Then I have my plus box, plus y squared, minus 22y, plus box, equals negative 369, and then I had plus green box and plus blue box for the x's and the y's. Whatever you do to one side, you got to do to the other. So again, to come up with this value, I take the middle term, cut it in half, and square it. Plop it in the box. That gives me 256. Both sides. Go ahead and come up with your value for the y's. Cut negative 22 in half, square it, and that gives you 121. No matter if you divide it in half and it's negative, whenever you square something, it's always positive. Okay, so now I've got to write my parentheses. I know that it's going to be something squared plus something squared equals some number. Right, this number is the easiest part to come up with. Type it in your calculator. For the first pair of parentheses, I know I have an x. When I take this value, divide it by 2, that gives me the number I need, plus 16. And then we have y. And again, take that number, cut it in half again, and it gives me minus 11. You could go through the whole add multiply process if you want to. I won't stop you, but I will say that this is easier just to remember the trick divided by 2. because then your squared is right here. It's the same thought. Cut in half, square. Cut in half, square. Right? I cut in half, I already have the square. Cut in half, I already have the square. Okay, so it's that process of dividing that middle term by 2 and squaring. Then it says state the center and the radius of this circle. Well, we're ready to do it. It means take the negated version of your number, right? Negate the sign. That's a comma right here. I don't know why it looks so goofy. And then the radius, remember that this represents r squared. So r squared equals 8. So we have to take the square root of both sides. In this case, r equals square root 8. And I don't know the value of that number because it's a decimal, so I leave it just the way that it is. Negative 16, comma 11, and r equals square root 8. Go ahead and flip to the next page. We're going to see, I think, one more example. So this one, same idea, but it looks like it has way less terms, right? So I'm going to group x's with x's. So, there's only an x squared. Okay, we can deal with it. It's fine. Then I've got y's with y's, and then we've got this constant, and it's already on the right-hand side of the equals, right? So I've got x squared. Normally you have another term, and then you put your plus box in here. If you want to put the plus box, it's totally fine, but we'll talk about what that's going to mean when we get to putting the value in there. And then equals 19 plus box plus box. So again, to come up with the value, I have to take the middle term. Well, there's no middle term here, right? So really, it's just going to be a plus 0. There's nothing to add for the x's. If I didn't even have that plus box there, that would be totally fine too. Then I take this negative 18, cut it in half, square it, and that gives me 81. So now with this part, this is a little weird, right? You're thinking okay, I've got parentheses squared, x, and some number. Well, take that number, cut it in half. Wait a second. There's nothing there. So really, it's a plus 0. Or in other words, just x squared. It doesn't matter to me how you write it. If you write plus 0, it might help you out in the end. But they all mean the same thing, right? I'm adding nothing to x squared, so really it's just x squared. Then I have plus parentheses squared. This part should be your easy one. Y. Cut it in half. And then you've already got your squared on there. Equals this typed into your calculator. 81 and 19 give you 100. So I could write this equation in the way that I did, x plus 0 squared plus y minus 9 squared equals 100, or I could write it this way, where I have x squared plus y minus 9 squared equals 100. Either way is fine, right? They're both going to be accepted because x plus 0 is the same thing as just x. Now, though, when I write the center, this is why I was telling you that it might be helpful to have the plus 0, because that means the center for the x coordinate is 0. This negative 9, of course, becomes positive 9. There was nothing attached to the x in order to have an actual value other than 0 there. For the radius, remember this represents r squared, so r squared equals 100. So I have to square root both sides. And in this case, it equals out to 10. So center is 0, 9. Radius is square root of 100, or in other words, 10. So again, the difference with example 3 was that we didn't have anything to cut in half and square for the x term. So I can either put that box in there or I don't have to. But you do have to recognize that when there's nothing attached to the x squared, that means that there's going to be a 0 as the x coordinate. Same thing would happen if this had just been a y squared with no other terms. This would have been a 0 for the coordinate of the y part of the center. Okay, if you've got questions, let us know. But again, the steps are listed out on the first page, and they should be relatively easy to follow now that we've done 3 examples. Make sure that you practice this because it can be tricky unless you're practicing. And you won't remember these steps unless you're practicing. So I'm just going to write this in case you don't have headphones in. Practice practice, practice. Okay, so go do your practice before you take your CFU. Please and thank you. Goodbye.